Hey everyone, welcome in. Ready for a deep dive? We're
Yeah.
going deep on sacrificial love in marriage. But, and this is a big but, we're focusing on it from the perspective of being a son of God.
I love it.
So get ready, it's going to be a good one. Our goal today is to really understand how this idea, which is, rooted in Christian theology, how it actually plays out in a real marriage,
Mhm.
like yours. Not just some theoretical pie-in-the-sky kind of thing.
Right.
And we're super lucky to have a fantastic expert joining us who can help us unpack all of this. Welcome to the show. So glad to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, this is a topic I'm really passionate about, both personally and professionally, so I'm excited to dive in.
Perfect. Let's jump right in with Ephesians 5.2533, that part where it says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church. And it goes on about how he gave himself up for her.
Intense, right?
Yeah.
Like using Christ's sacrifice as the model for marriage, that feels pretty heavy duty. What are your initial thoughts on that? It is interesting how it frames that, isn't it? Because it's not just about that one event, Christ's sacrifice on the cross. It's about the whole heart posture behind it. Think about it. This is about continuously, actively choosing to put your spouse's well-being above your own. I mean, the passage even says Christ presented the church to himself as without stain or wrinkle. Powerful imagery. Like, look at her. She's radiant, without a single flaw. If that's not dedication and care, I don't know what is.
Without stain or wrinkle. Wow. That makes you think, right? Like how much effort we put into getting dressed up for a big event. Now imagine that level of care and attention, but in your marriage every single day. That takes commitment. And that's where this whole Son of God perspective comes in. It's not just about being a decent husband. It's connected to something way deeper, like a whole identity shift.
Absolutely.
So break it down for us. What does it really mean to see yourself as a son of God in this context, in a marriage context?
You hit it on the head when you said deeper, because as our source explains, being a son of God, it goes beyond just, saying you believe. It's about this amazing thing, this concept of adoption, which we see in Romans 8.1417. We're brought into this unbelievable family relationship with God as our Father purely through faith. And like any good father, there's an inheritance. And the Bible uses that word, inheritance, to show us how amazing the privileges and responsibilities are that come with being part of God's family.
It's like we're not starting from scratch. We're tapping into this legacy, this heritage of love. It's already there, which is, when you think about it, kind of mind-blowing.
It is. We're stepping into something much bigger than us.
Wow.
And so when we think about marriage, a big question comes up. How does a husband, if he sees himself as inheriting this huge, limitless, sacrificial love from God, how does that change how he is as a husband, how he treats his wife, how he loves his wife, how he cares for his wife?
It's like leveling up your love game. Tapping into this power source way stronger than just your own willpower. But I got to admit, when we talk about this idea of laying down your life for your wife, and I'm saying this as a happily married man, it does give you pause.
Sure.
Like, I'm sure some of you listening are thinking, wait, hold on, we're not talking about actually literally dying for our spouses, are we? I mean, I love my wife to pieces, but I'm not ready to build an altar in a backyard.
No, definitely not.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
Sacrifice is a big part of this, yes, but it's not about neglecting yourself or turning into a doormat. It's about this change, this fundamental shift in your perspective.
Okay, I'm getting that.
Yeah.
So then what does this sacrificial love actually look like day to day in a marriage? How do you live that out?
It's about choosing selflessness consistently, actively. And our source even gives us some real-world examples of this, like just being there for your wife emotionally when she is having a stressful day, making sure she feels safe and secure, and truly listening to her needs without judgment. Imagine that, putting her needs and wants at the same level as your own. And sometimes, honestly, even putting them above your own.
So it's about those everyday actions, those everyday acts of love and service, less about those grand gestures, which, let's be honest, those can be way harder to keep up than, like, a fancy dinner on your anniversary.
You're totally right, because it's about showing up every single day, even when it's a pain or takes more work. It's about being present and giving to the relationship, even when life gets crazy.
Which, let's be real, it always does, right?
It does.
Life is going to lie. But, okay, here's the million-dollar question then. How do we actually do this? How do we live this out? Is it just about having more willpower? Because, frankly, that just sounds exhausting and impossible to keep up long term.
You've hit on something so important. It's not just about willpower. It's about this incredible concept called divine empowerment.
Ooh, okay, now you're talking. I'm listening.
Right. As sons of God, we're given the Holy Spirit. And that's not just some abstract theological idea either. It's real.
Okay, tell me more.
So Galatians 4:4-7, it talks about how the Spirit is sent into our hearts, right? This is a real tangible source of strength and guidance, and it empowers us to live out this sacrificial love. We're not talking about becoming superhuman overnight, but about tapping into this wellspring of love, this source of love that's bigger than ourselves.
So it's like we have access to this secret superpower that helps us love more deeply and more consistently than we ever could just on our own.
Yes, that's a great way to put
I
it.
love it.
It's realizing we don't have to do this whole thing alone. We have divine guidance, divine help, as we're trying to love our wives in this sacrificial way.
Okay, that is encouraging. Because, let's be real, relationships are hard. They're going to have challenges. But knowing there's backup when things get tough, that makes all the difference.
Yeah.
And speaking of practical help, the source we're looking at today, it doesn't just leave us hanging with these big ideas. It gets into the practical stuff, right? Giving us actual examples of what sacrificial love can look like in a marriage,
Right.
whether it's communication or respect or service, you name it. So what would you say is like a really relevant example for husbands like right now?
You know, one that sticks out to me, and I think this gets missed a lot, is this idea of encouraging your wife's growth. Just like Christ wants the church to thrive, to reach its full potential, a husband who's living out this sacrificial love, he's going to be intentional about supporting his wife's dreams, her goals, her aspirations, even her spiritual journey.
I love that. It's about being her biggest cheerleader, not just for like the huge accomplishments, but also just in the everyday. She's going after the things she's passionate about, creating a safe space for her to grow, explore, and just become the best version of herself.
Yeah, exactly. It's about truly partnering with her, walking beside her as she's discovering and stepping into her full potential.
And you know what? That ties in perfectly with this idea of agape love. Our source talks about that. Can you explain that a bit? What's so special about that specific Greek word for love?
Yeah, agape is different from other types of love because it's not based on feelings, or what you get out of it. It's about making a deliberate choice to love someone unconditionally, no matter what, despite their flaws, despite their shortcomings. It's seen as the highest form of love, the kind of love Christ showed us. And as sons of God, this is the love we're called to show in our marriages.
That's fascinating, especially because we live in a world where love is about like grand romantic gestures and these intense feelings. But agape love, it's so much deeper than that. It's about consistency and intentionality, choosing to love even when it's hard or inconvenient.
You got it. It's about making a conscious decision to act in loving ways even when you don't really feel like it. It's about putting your wife's needs above your own. It's a love that comes from commitment, from sacrifice.
And when we get these nuances, these different shades of meaning from the original language,
Yeah.
it really adds another layer to how we understand the love that husbands are called to have.
Yeah.
It's not about those warm, fuzzy feelings. It's about something much bigger, something more meaningful.
It is. It's a love rooted in selflessness, in sacrifice, and this unwavering commitment to your spouse's well-being. It's a love that really reflects the heart of God.
That is so powerful. We have to talk about the different views out there about roles in marriage. Our source talks about the complementarian view and the egalitarian view. But before we get into that, let's break those down because I think they can be confusing. What do those even mean?
I think that's really smart to define those first because they can definitely be confusing terms.
Absolutely. So we'll be right back to unpack those views after this quick break. Don't go anywhere. All right, we're back. Before the break, we were getting deep into this idea of sacrificial love in marriage, looking at it through this lens of being a son of God. We even unpacked that awesome Greek word, agape.
Powerful stuff.
It is. But now, let's talk about those different views people have on roles in a marriage. Our source talks about both the complementarian and egalitarian viewpoints.
Right.
And I know those terms can sound kind of intimidating, like, whoa, what does it even mean? But don't worry. We're not here to pick a side or say one's right and one's wrong. It's more about understanding the different ways people think about this and how even within this concept of sacrificial love, there can be different ideas about how roles and responsibilities should work in a marriage.
Absolutely.
So could you give us a quick explanation of these two perspectives? Like, what are the main differences between them?
Sure. So the complementarian view, our source explains, emphasizes that husbands and wives have different roles. They often look to how Christ leads the church and how the church submits to him as kind of a parallel.
Right.
But it's not that one is better than the other, It's about recognizing that they each have different strengths and responsibilities, and both of those are important and valuable.
So it's like a division of labor, but, and this is important, it's done with respect. both people understanding that the other person's contribution is important in its own way.
Exactly. The focus is on serving each other, but from those different places. It's not about control or one person being the boss.
Right, right.
Now, the egalitarian view, it's a different way of looking at it. It supports the idea of more equal roles in a marriage where both partners share leadership.
Okay, so it's more about partnership, where decisions and things you're responsible for are split more evenly.
Exactly. Mutual submission is a key concept here. Both partners willingly put the other person's needs first. They make decisions together, and they share responsibilities in a way that works for both of them.
It seems like no matter which view you agree with more, the common thing is that sacrificial love, that agape love we were talking about. This is the base, the main principle, no matter how you define those roles in your marriage.
You got it. And I think that's really important to remember. You might be more traditional in how you see roles, you might be more egalitarian, but that call to love sacrificially, to put your spouse first, that's always important.
Yeah. It's like that guiding star.
Yeah.
It keeps you going in the right direction no matter what storms come your way in your marriage. Like that.
Okay.
So let's change gears for a second, bring this back to our listeners. We've been talking about the theology, the ideas behind it all, but how does actually living out this sacrificial love change a marriage in the real world? Like, what are the tangible differences it makes in everyday life together?
That's a great question. And I think one of the most powerful impacts, and our source really digs into this, is how it makes trust and intimacy even stronger.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
When a husband continuously chooses to love his wife sacrificially, to put her needs first, it creates this feeling of safety and security in the relationship. It's so powerful.
It's like you're building this rock-solid foundation of trust. Every little act of love, every time you serve your wife, it's like laying another brick. It's those little things that really add up over time, not just the big gestures.
I love how you put that. It's so true. And when you have that strong foundation of trust, real intimacy can grow. When a wife feels truly known and cherished by her husband, she's more likely to open up, to let her guard down, to be vulnerable. And that's where the real magic happens. That's when you can be your true selves with each other, without being afraid of being judged. It's beautiful.
It's like creating a safe space for each other, where you can both just be yourselves, all your imperfections and everything. But let's be real, we don't live in a perfect world. Relationships are going to face challenges.
Right. All the time.
And our source even talks about that. It acknowledges those real-life roadblocks, like pressures from our culture, our own flaws and hang-ups, stress from outside sources, all those things trying to mess up our marriages.
There's a battlefield out there.
It is. So when things get tough, when those selfish instincts pop up, and let's be real, they do for all of us, what advice would you give to husbands who are really trying to live out this kind of love? What can we hold on to when we feel like we're drowning?
Oh, man, that's the question, isn't it? And you are so right. It's ice tough. Anyone who tells you it's easy is probably lying or hasn't been married long enough.
Right.
Our source reminds us that it's not about willpower alone. We can't just muscle our way through it. It's about tapping into that divine empowerment we were talking about before, that connection to the Holy Spirit. Remember, that's not just for Sundays at church.
Yeah. It's like calling in the cavalry when things get really intense. Instead of trying to win this battle on our own, we can tap into a strength that's way bigger than us.
Exactly. It's about being honest with ourselves, admitting our limitations. And then we can rely on a power greater than ourselves to love in a way we never could with just our own human strength.
That makes sense. But how do you do that?
Practically speaking, it might look like taking a moment to pray, asking God for direction, or opening up the Bible and letting it speak to you. It could also mean talking to a mentor or a close friend, someone you trust, someone who can support you, give you encouragement.
It's like having a pit crew standing by, ready to help you change a flat tire or fill up your tank when you're running on empty. Because trying to do it all ourselves, depending on our own strength, that's how you burn out.
Oh, yeah. Resentment, burnout, that's the opposite of what we want in our marriages.
Exactly.
And I can't stress enough how important it is to communicate openly and honestly with your spouse.
Communication's key.
Don't be afraid to admit when you're struggling. Ask for help. You're a team, remember? Work together.
That's so important because at the end of the day, you are on the same team.
Right.
You're both fighting for the same goal, which is a healthy, happy marriage.
That's it.
And sometimes to get that, you got to be vulnerable and say, hey, I need a break or I need you right now. It's about being real, both as individuals and as a couple. Now, I love how our source doesn't just throw these abstract concepts at us and then say, okay, you're on your own.
Whoa.
It actually gives us real life examples of this kind of love in action. Like Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac.
Yeah.
And of course, the biggest example of all, Jesus giving his life for us.
Right. Powerful stuff.
But those are some pretty intense examples. Like, I love my wife, but nobody's asking me to climb a mountain with a knife anytime soon.
Thankfully.
Thank goodness.
Right, yes.
But seriously,
Yeah.
how do we bridge that gap? How do we take those huge examples of sacrificial love and make them real in our own marriages?
That's the million-dollar question. And you're right, it trips a lot of people up. They look at these massive historical examples and go, there's no way I could ever do that. But here's the thing. It's not about perfectly copying the scale of the sacrifice. It's about understanding the heart behind it.
So it's not so much about the what, but more about the why. I like that. Tell me more.
Okay, so think about Abraham. He was willing to sacrifice Isaac, right? That was ultimately about obeying God, showing his incredible love and trust. He was putting his own desires aside, even if it meant giving up something as precious as his son. And then there's Jesus. His whole life leading up to the cross was all about this boundless love for us, this deep, deep desire to see us reconciled to God.
So the thing that ties it all together is this deep, strong love that motivates these acts of sacrifice. It's not about the outward action itself, but about what's going on in the heart.
Yes, exactly.
That is powerful stuff.
It really is. And when you really get that, it changes everything. It's not about comparing our sacrifices to some perfect standard that we could never reach. It's about looking inward at our own hearts.
Yeah.
It's about asking ourselves, am I willing to make sacrifices, whether they're big or small, out of love for my wife? Am I willing to put her first, even when it's tough, even when I don't really feel like it?
Those are tough questions.
Yeah.
But if we want that kind of love that can change our marriages, we got to face those questions every day.
We do. And what's amazing is that this love, this sacrificial love, it's not some impossible dream. It's a real tangible force. It can transform marriages. I've seen it happen over and over again in my work with couples.
Really? Do you have a story, one that really shows how this kind of love can make a difference in a marriage?
I do. And it's a perfect example of how powerful this kind of love can be.
Yeah.
I worked with this couple, let's call them Sarah and David. They came to me and they were this close to getting a divorce.
Oh, wow.
Years of resentment, not communicating well, unmet needs. It had driven a huge wedge between them.
It's hard to come back from that.
It is. It is. But the thing that struck me was that under all that hurt, all that anger, there was still this little spark of love, this little glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could fight for their marriage.
So even though there was all that pain, there was still a little bit of hope left.
Yeah.
That's really encouraging. So what happened? How'd they turn things around?
Well, we started digging deeper, and we discovered that both Sarah and David, they were operating from this place of scarcity. Like they were always trying to protect themselves from getting hurt again.
That makes sense though, right? I mean, we all have baggage, past relationships where we got hurt.
Of course. We're all human, but the key is to recognize those patterns, those old ways of thinking, and then we can choose a different path, you know? And that's exactly what Sarah and David did. They decided together that they were going to start practicing this sacrificial love, putting the other person's needs first, even when it was really, really hard.
So they decided to change the script, break free from those old unhealthy patterns. They chose love over fear. That's awesome.
It was amazing to witness. It wasn't a walk in the park, let me tell you. There were bumps in the road.
Yeah.
But they were committed to communicating, to really listening to each other, to doing things for each other out of love. And they were committed to understanding each other's love languages. And slowly, brick by brick, they started to rebuild that trust and intimacy.
That's so good.
They learned how to really listen to each other, how to validate each other's feelings, and how to give each other grace when they messed up.
Because we all mess up.
We all do. It's inevitable, but it sounds like they were both ready to do the work, to dig deep and be honest with themselves and with each other, even when it was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that is the key ingredient, because sacrificial love, it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress. It's about showing up every single day and choosing to love your spouse, even when it's hard, even when you don't think they deserve it. And you know what? As they kept choosing love, kept putting the other person first, something amazing happened.
Okay, you can't just stop there. What happened?
It was like all that love that had been buried under the hurt and the disappointment, it was like they dug it up. It just proves how much sacrificial love can heal, how it can completely transform a relationship that feels totally broken.
It really is amazing. And you're right, their story, it's not that unusual. There are so many couples out there, their marriages have been totally changed because they embraced this kind of love.
So true. When both people in a marriage commit to putting the other person first, even when it's hard, even when they disagree, that's when incredible things can happen. It's like this paradox. When you let go of needing to be right, needing to win, needing to protect yourself, that's when you create space for love to really work its magic.
It's like that saying, right? Love isn't just a feeling, it's an action. And sometimes it's a really, really hard action to take. But like we've been talking about, the rewards, they're huge.
They are. It all comes down to changing what you're focused on. Instead of thinking, what am I getting out of this? It's, what am I giving? How can I pour into my spouse? How can I help them be the best version of themselves? When we start thinking like that, that's when we find true happiness in marriage. It's in the giving, the serving, the loving sacrificially.
It's about that daily choice, that commitment to love, honor, and cherish your wife. And not because she's perfect. It's about choosing to see the best in her, even when she can't see it herself. It's about being that safe place for each other, that unwavering support, that constant source of encouragement.
That's so well said. It's about showing that same love and grace we get from God, not because we have to, but because it just overflows from our own hearts. It's like this ripple effect, you know?
Wow, what a conversation. You've given us so much to think about, so much we can take and use in our own marriages. Thanks so much for being here, for sharing your wisdom with us.
It's been a joy to be here. And remember, sacrificial love, it's not a finish line you cross. It's a journey. It's about showing up every single day and making that choice to love, to serve, to cherish your spouse.
And to our listeners, as we wrap up this deep dive, we'll leave you with this thought. If you could pick just one small act of sacrificial love to work on in your own marriage, just like you'd exercise a muscle to make it stronger, what would it be? How can you make that a natural part of your relationship, something that comes from your heart, something you want to do, not something you feel like you have to do? Keep searching, keep growing. And as always, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.